air with the push to hold police accountable for the deaths of Tyre Nichols and Breonna Taylor, with the Justice Department opening up a new investigation in Memphis and closing one in Louisville. You're going to hear from the Attorney General and Taylor's mom in just a minute on the frankly disturbing reports of how police are discriminating against Black Americans. Plus, we'll take you live to California, where the snow is so piled up they can't possibly handle another storm, but they're going to have to because the rain's rolling in. That could mean really dangerous flooding. We're on the ground. We're also live in South Carolina, where there's a vigil tonight for two of the victims of that deadly kidnapping in Mexico. And as a ton of new details are coming in, we've got a first look at the suspect and the place where the survivors were found. Plus, every car needs a few things, right? Windshield, seatbelt, steering wheel. But if you've got a Tesla, one of those may not be a given. Why the feds are looking into steering wheels that apparently just fell off on the highway. Coming up. And on this International Women's Day, I'll go one-on-one with one of the rock stars leading ESPN's all-female broadcast tonight. And we'll also talk later about why hot girl walks are so hot right now and for a great cause. All of it coming up in just a bit. Hey, I'm Hallie, and tonight the Biden administration is laying out some new moves to try to hold two police departments accountable for a pair of high-profile killings of Black people at the hands of officers. Deaths that have shaken so many people's confidence in law enforcement in this country. Let's start with the investigation that they're just opening up today in Memphis after the horrific killing of 29-year-old Tyre Nichols. Now, the Justice Department will look into the city's use of force and de-escalation policies. They're also going to look into specialized units like the one involved in Nichols' death. We know now that more than a dozen Memphis police and fire department officials are facing some of these new administrative charges, in addition to the 5 former officers accused of murdering Nichols. He was a father, Nichols was. He was an aspiring photographer who was pulled over for reckless driving. But the city's police chief says there's not any evidence that actually happened. And as the DOJ opens that investigation up, they are closing a different investigation, a legitimately scathing investigation into the Louisville Police Department, accusing officers of excessive force and of discriminating against Black people. Here's Attorney General Merrick Garland.
It is an affront to the vast majority of officers who put their lives on the line every day to serve Louisville with honor. And it is an affront to the people of Louisville who deserve better.
Some of the details are just terrible. These allegations that officers threw drinks from their cars at people walking, that they insulted people with disabilities, that they used racial slurs aimed at Black people. The Louisville Review was put in place after the death of Breonna Taylor in 2020. She was 26. She was an EMT, remember, who was shot and killed during a botched police raid of her apartment. Nobody's been charged with murdering her, but 4 officers face federal civil rights charges. We heard from Taylor's mother today, who says she welcomes this new review, but she's frustrated, this new report, but she's frustrated that it took this long to come to these conclusions.
It's heartbreaking to know that everything you've been saying from day one has to be said again.
We'll talk about the DOJ's moves in Louisville with Ron Allen in just a sec, but we want to take it on the ground to Kathy Park, who is live for us in Memphis. And Kathy, let's, in the ethos of this show, pull back the curtain, right? Because there was some discussion, some speculation that perhaps, there was going to be released hours and hours of new video today, right? Now we're finding out more about this broader picture of what happened to Nichols when he was killed. A judge has blocked the release of that video, but do you have a general sense of what it's going to show us? What else can you tell us?
Yeah, Hallie, so initially, earlier today, we thought that we were going to get this massive information dump with hours of footage, audio, as well as documents, but it really kind of came as a surprise when the judge decided to block the release of this footage. And still, it's pretty unclear what the 20 hours of footage would have held. There are still a lot of questions about how the initial confrontation began. We spoke with Ben Crump earlier today at a separate event in New York City. And he alluded to the fact that within those 20 hours, potentially you would see a family member of Nichols who was also recorded on one of the body cam footage. But still a lot of questions, especially since we don't have that footage today. And earlier, a lawyer representing one of the officers, one of the defendants, said, look, we don't want this footage out there right now, especially 20 hours of it, because it could potentially taint the jury pool, and a potential juror could form an opinion ahead of trial. And right now, the judge said it's unclear as far as the timeline when this footage may be released. Hallie?
We mentioned that federal investigation now that was called for by the police chief, by the mayor. We're also going to put up here on screen some of the changes that the Memphis PD just approved just in the last maybe 12 hours, not even, including more independent oversight, more civilian oversight. They're going to stop unmarked cars from traffic stops. They're going to try to boost transparency, basically. What's the upshot of this from people in Memphis? Like, what do they hope to see here?
Yeah, I think you nailed it there, Hallie. I think that the big thing is transparency, because obviously the relationship between law enforcement and the community was fractured in the wake of what happened with Tyre Nichols. So yesterday we got a sense of that at a city council meeting, but obviously it looks like change is slowly starting to take shape here as far as police reforms. But the outrage wasn't just centered here in Memphis. It was really all across the country once that video came out in early January. So you mentioned the DOJ. At the federal level, they are also taking action as well and offering guidance when it comes to specialized units. You might remember here in Memphis, the Scorpion unit got a lot of scrutiny because a lot of the officers who were part of that unit are now facing those criminal charges, Hallie.
Kathy Park, thank you very much. Let's go now to Ron Allen on what's happening in Louisville. Ron, we talked a second ago about some of the just disgusting details from this DOJ report. It's not just discrimination against black people. The report also gets into how some serious crimes, they say, go unsolved, even as the department focuses on, you know, comparatively smaller things like broken taillights, right? Walk us through it.
It basically says that this department is not policing this community and is doing all kinds of terrible things, especially the use of force. It talks about its use of chokeholds and neck restraints and tasers and police dogs and allowing dogs to bite people even after they've surrendered. It also talks about how the police department doesn't investigate cases of sexual assault or allegations of sexual misconduct by police officers or domestic violence allegations against police officers. So it's a real top-to-bottom just taking apart of this department. So what happens now, the city, the police department, the Justice Department put together something called the consent decree. Basically, it's a legally binding document that spells out in a lot of detail, exactly what the department has to do to reform itself, training, all kinds of things that it has to do. And this is a tactic that, as you know, a tool that the Obama administration especially used back then to put as many as a dozen or more major police departments in the situation where it was being forced to reform, and there's an independent monitor, often a retired judge, who is overseeing this process. Now, one thing that this does not do, this investigation, it does not necessarily bring justice to Breonna Taylor and her family. Remember, there are still 4 police officers who are indirectly charged with her murder. They're charged with violating her civil rights. Essentially, they're accused of falsifying the search warrant that led them to the house, and the Justice Department has said that the raid should have never happened based on that, and one of those 4 officers is cooperating with the authorities. But still, there has not been a police officer who has been held directly accountable for Breonna Taylor's murder. Today, their reaction was essentially, look, we told you so. We told you this was going on. It's systemic. There have been problems, and Breonna Taylor's death was just a symptom of deeper problems. And they're saying today that this report, basically, we told you so.
But what happens here, Ron, right? I mean, real quick, like, what are the tangible changes? We don't know yet, obviously, because we got to see. But that's the question I feel like people want to know. There's
this consent decree. There are any number of changes, reforms that it will outline, from training on up, use of force policies. And there's an independent monitor who oversees this process. So the department has to report to this monitor over the coming years about specific reforms that they are doing, specific policies that they are changing. It's the same thing that's been put in place in cities like Baltimore, New York, Chicago, Ferguson, Missouri, and it often happens after these high-profile killings that are racially charged. That's been the pattern in recent years. Baltimore is another example. So that's what's going to happen in Louisville, and it sounds like it's going to happen in Memphis as well after what happened to Tyre Nichols.
Ron Allen, thank you very much, live for us on that. Lots to get to, of course, there. Let's talk about what's happening out west, with California leaders sounding the alarm ahead of a powerful storm that's going to bring a lot of rain and a lot of wind. And here's the danger. A lot of these places are already piled up with a bunch of snow. So you get a whole bunch of rain that comes in. What happens? Well, the snow melts, and then there's this huge risk of flooding for 16 million people who are under flood watches already. Look at some of these images. You got crews laying out sandbags to try to get ready. One county says you got to stock up on 2 weeks of essentials. And up in the San Bernardino Mountains, some people are still stranded in their homes after more than a week when the last storm snowed them in. Let's bring in Nyala Charles in Crestline, California, which is just outside of San Bernardino. So Nyala, let's get to these people who are stuck. How is it possible they are still there after a week? When is help going to get to them?
Right. So, Hallie, it's been days since the last snowfall, right? But it was a lot of snow in a short amount of time. So look at this wall here. This is what's left after the plows go through the main roads. Imagine if all of that snow, at some parts 20 feet high, are in front of your home. That's what people are dealing with now. They have to get to those main roads. So let me introduce you to Antoinette. She lives here. She was thankfully able to drive out here to get some food. But tell us what it was like to dig your car out to get to this point.
We had to dig out 4 times altogether. On day 2, when we were just trying to shovel, there was 3 of us, and the snow was falling so hard that for every shovelful we moved, we got another shovelful of snow.
And how high was that?
At that point, it was about the 3-foot height.
3 feet of snow in front of your home. How long did it take for you to physically take that out?
It took us all this time, since the first day of the snow till yesterday.
So days.
Yeah, and we're 73, we're digging. But that's not the sad part. The sad part is we can get out and we have our car full of the food that's being wonderfully donated. But this wall here, these people that are behind this wall and haven't had anyone to dig them out, now we have to find a way to get to our neighbors and get this food over this wall to them if they could get out of their house.
Right. So what Antoinette's saying, Hallie, is that's the danger here. And first responders are saying it's that access in the coming days that will continue to be an issue here. Hallie?
Real quick now, and we look at the next storm, right? We talked about the potential of floods, the potential also in California, given sort of the way that the landscape is, the potential for mudslides, right? We've heard from her on how people are getting ready, but what else can you tell us about like what's to come? I'm not asking you to channel your inner meteorologist because that's a Bill Caron's job, but talk us through it.
Well, yeah, so I spoke to some fire crews here, and they say with rain expected on Friday, the next thing that they're worried about is that avalanche warning they have, and that's because with that rain, with these temperatures, that means more ice, and more ice means heavier snow, and that's what creates that avalanche potential and also creates the potential for more damage to homes and businesses with roofs collapsing. Hallie?
Nyala Charles, thank you very much. We have some significant breaking news to get to you right now that is just coming into us exclusively here at NBC News. You remember that Virginia 6-year-old who shot his elementary school teacher? We are just now learning that he will not face charges. Again, this is from an interview that you will only see here on NBC News that our team is getting with the city's prosecutor just in the last really couple of minutes or so. The Newport News Commonwealth attorney who's overseeing this case says they had some questions about whether the 6-year-old could take the stand, but that he's still looking at possible criminal charges for adults. Now, to recap this story, and remember, it was headlines for, gosh, weeks here on this outlet and others. The 6-year-old shot his first-grade teacher, Abigail Zwerner, in the hand and chest back in January at Rich Neck Elementary School. She spent 2 weeks in the hospital. A lawyer for the boy's family and the law firm representing Zwerner are declining comment as we speak. I want to bring in our NBC News legal analyst, Kristen Gibbons-Fedden. Okay, so Kristen, the prospect, and again, this is just breaking here on NBCNews.com and right here on NBC News Now. The prospect that a 6-year-old would take the stand was described by this official as problematic here. This attorney has the Commonwealth's attorney has serious reservations about bringing those charges against a child. That seems to be fundamentally what is at the core of this decision.
Yeah, because keep in mind, all defendants, whether a child or whether an adult, have a constitutional right to a fair trial. That involves having the ability to assist in one's defense. Well, when you have a child who is 6 years old, typically most states say under the age of 10, they are unable to understand the nature of the charges posed against them. And as a result, they, from a competency standpoint, cannot exercise their right to zealously represent or assist in their defense. And so they aren't able to be charged just from a constitutional perspective based on their lack of competency due to their chronological age.
The other piece of this is that Howard Gwynn, this Commonwealth's attorney, said that the focus now, if not the focus, at least the attention is turning to others, meaning adults, meaning, for example, I would imagine, and he didn't specifically say this, he said any person or persons we can believe proved beyond a reasonable doubt committed a crime. I think it's fair for like a layperson to look at that and go, okay, does that mean educators in the building? Does that mean members of administration? Does that mean relatives or perhaps family members of this little boy? Are we thinking in the right direction here? What does that say to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Because keep in mind, Hallie, remember Ethan Crumley, his parents were charged and they stand charged for Ethan coming to school and engaging in a mass shooting. And so equally in this case, the 6-year-old's parents could be charged. How did he get that gun? Where did it come from? Was it locked up? Was there negligence? Was there any efforts from the parents or even security within the school that endangered the welfare of other individuals because that gun was allowed to be in the school? There was no efforts, if there were any, were there any efforts to prevent what actually happened, which was the ultimately fatal shooting of this teacher? So they could absolutely be charged either for reckless or negligent type charges, but probably not intentional charges, because it would be very difficult for a prosecutor to prove that anyone intended for this child to utilize that gun and murder someone, but certainly any charges regarding reckless intent or negligent intent.
There is certainly potentially still more to come on this story. Again, exclusive here at the moment to NBC News. Kristen Gibbons-Fedden, thank you very much for bringing that to us. Appreciate it. We are hearing for the first time from President Biden today about what's become yet another political flashpoint after the January 6th attack on the Capitol. And that's the new footage aired by Tucker Carlson on Fox News of the insurrection itself. With the president writing on Twitter today, how dare Republicans diminish or deny what Capitol police officers went through on the 6th, adding that he hopes members of the Republican Party are, in his words, feeling ashamed for what was done to undermine our law enforcement. This comes after Carlson used surveillance video, like what you're seeing here, given to his team by House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, to make the insurrection seem more kind of innocuous than it actually was. A sanitizing, if you will, of January 6th that's been criticized from across the political spectrum, including from Republicans. Listen.
I don't take any part in whitewashing January 6th. It wasn't a stroll through the Capitol.
It was an outrageous act. A lot of people were injured. Our building was severely damaged. And efforts to try and pretend that it was something other than that are despicable and frankly dangerous.
Even though some on the right are calling this out, House Republicans are pushing ahead on their own investigations into the 6th, a kind of investigate the January 6th investigators situation as they are looking into the select committee. You're seeing, of course, the president's tweet there on this whole thing. What does it mean, Mike Memoli, who is joining us now, for the president and his fellow Democrats to be having this January 6th conversation, you know, again, right as 2024 is starting to heat up? What are you hearing from sources and people close to the White House here?
Yeah, Hallie, I mean, I think when I talked to the White House about this, the first thing they say is this tweet reflects the president's genuine dismay about the fact that a leading source of information for many Americans is significantly, to put it mildly, downplaying the events that we all saw on January 6th. But I think it also speaks to what is going to be a real pillar of President Biden's likely reelection campaign, which is this idea that the battle for the soul of the nation is still ongoing. We remember when the president launched his 2020 campaign, he was talking about that scene in Charlottesville when you had white supremacists, of course, that demonstration, which then President Donald Trump did not condemn. In fact, he even expressed some support for those who were there demonstrating, talking about very fine people on both sides. And so you can very easily see how the events of January 6th, but this larger so-called big lie is going to be a front and center for President Biden as he runs for re-election. Now, we should note, Hallie, that this is a tweet from President Biden. We haven't seen him. He's had no public events the last 2 days. But it was also a subject that came up at the White House today. Here's Karine Jean-Pierre addressing it as well.
As it relates to the Tucker Carlson question, we agree with Fox Nation's own attorneys and executives who have repeatedly stressed in multiple courts of law that Tucker Carlson is not credible when it comes to this issue.
Now, another pillar of the president's reelection strategy is going to be battling with House Republicans on policy, and we're going to be seeing that tomorrow when he travels to Philadelphia to roll out his budget for 2024.
Oh, a budget speech. Mike Memoli, thank you. And I will say those are interesting because they are symbolic documents typically, but they do lay out sort of where maybe a president's head is at, their priorities, et cetera. I don't mean to mock budgets. Mem, thank you. We've got a rare look today behind a top secret curtain on Capitol Hill with folks who almost never talk publicly about their work. Top intel officials, heads of the CIA, the NSA, the FBI, the Director of National Intelligence. showing up on defense in some ways over the threat from China, with some lawmakers worried about tension points with Beijing. Think the spy balloon or Taiwan or the pandemic. Listen.
What do we see there? Is China about to act?
Let's say China wants to invade Taiwan.
I don't think we've learned the lesson on China.
Increasingly hostile fishing disputes between China and its neighbors.
Beijing continues to hinder the global investigation.
And in this yearly assessment of the biggest threats facing the U.S., it wasn't just all about China. Look what's on your screen. Lawmakers wanted to know more about, like, nuclear weapons, risks of another pandemic, terrorism hotspots, climate change, and, of course, the war, Russia's war in Ukraine. NBC's Ken Delanian is joining us now. I mean, China's still kind of a dominant focus here. And what was interesting was you heard these top intel officials, including Avril Haines, say, hey, the assessment is that China is actually not trying to escalate, that it's actually in their best interest to let me put it in layman's terms, like keep it spicy but not too spicy.
That was the silver lining, but it was a pretty sobering assessment of the idea that China really sees a new era of competition with the United States. And they firmly believe that the United States is trying to hold them down, that our entire policy is directed at containing them, that what we say about maintaining an international order is just talk. But as you said, there was a silver lining. Take a listen to Avril Haines.
Despite this more public and directly critical rhetoric, however, we assess that Beijing still believes it benefits most by preventing a spiraling of tensions and by preserving stability in its relationship with the United States. He wants a period of relative calm to give China the time and stability it needs to address growing domestic difficulties.
So he wants calm, but he is still very willing to confront the United States all over the world.
There was also this piece of the threat assessment that talked about Chinese efforts to influence American politics on the state and local level here. That was interesting.
I found that fascinating. It was a stark warning to state and local officials. The IC basically saying, look, China is trying to influence...
IC being the intelligence community.
Sorry, yeah.
No, we love the lingo. We just like to know what it is.
That China is trying to influence American politics, but they feel like Washington has shut the door on them. There's a bipartisan consensus that, China is a threat. But they feel like state and local officials are more pliable. That's the term that the intelligence community used. And how are they trying to influence state and local politics? Covert social media campaigns, infiltrating people with spies, but also economic coercion. We will build this factory in your city if you hew to policies that are closer to Chinese interests. And that's really dangerous, and it's something that state and local officials need to be mindful of.
Ken Delanian, great reporting. Thank you. We're staying on China because it is big news today, right? With a lot of debate over how COVID started, of course, where it started. And today, you've actually had agreement on something. You actually had agreement from scientists and intel officials that China is actually the biggest roadblock to figuring out how this all began.
The Chinese government has done everything in its power to prevent the type of investigation into the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic that is 3 years overdue and still urgently required.
That's from a House investigation into COVID origins, a committee holding a hearing on that, basically. The only question here, of course, at the center of this Republican-led hearing was this, as you might be able to guess. Did the virus leak from a lab in China? That is the theory that the U.S. Energy Department backs with, I'm quoting here, low confidence. The FBI supports it, too, but other intel agencies do not. And the witnesses called by Republican lawmakers today say it's an open question. Janice Mackey-Freyer joins us now. And Janice, bottom line is, it's not like there's a ton of clarity still on the mystery of how specifically this pandemic got started.
Well, it's how this great debate has flourished is because there is a lack of evidence and a lack of any data coming from China. The hearings today focused on arguments for the lab leak. This idea, of course, that the virus somehow escaped from a lab in Wuhan and triggered the global pandemic. Again, there is no new evidence pointing to a lab leak or to the question of the origin of the virus itself. Now, one of the key witnesses today was Dr. Robert Redfield. He's the former director of the CDC under President Trump. Here's what he said.
I came to believe, and I still believe today, that it indicates that COVID-19 more likely was the result of an accidental lab leak than a result of a natural spillover event. This conclusion is based primarily on the biology of the virus itself, including the rapid high infectivity for human-to-human transmission.
Hallie, with such polarizing views, it's really hard to see how they're going to arrive at an answer, one that is going to be accepted. Scientists say it could take years and it may never come. What we do know is that the investigation from China's standpoint is a non-starter. China has dismissed the lab leak theory as an attempt to smear the country. They've spent the past few years trying to give life to their own theories on the origins of COVID. But the collection of data, the investigation within China is not going to happen. China has said that it's done its part in the investigation and it now needs to look elsewhere. If we look at the grand sum of this, though, Hallie, this is coming at a time when there are flashpoints over everything from trade to technology to Russia to COVID origins. So these hearings that are happening are going to have wide-ranging consequences for a U.S.-China relationship that's already pretty fraught. Hallie?
Janice Mackey-Freyer live for us on that. Janice, good to see you. Thank you. Coming up here on the show, your TikTok feed may look a little bit different soon, with the company rolling out a new feature with a pretty big catch. Plus, the bananas and kind of brilliant way that a guy stranded in the snow with no cell service called for help. Spoiler, don't look at your screen. It's coming up in the local later this hour. Stay with us. Tonight in South Carolina, we're looking ahead to a vigil for the victims of the deadly kidnapping in Mexico, as we're just finding out a fifth person was on that trip but never crossed the border, from what a law enforcement official tells NBC News. It comes as we're starting to piece together kind of a timeline of just how these lifelong friends ended up kidnapped by suspected cartel gunmen. Two of them died. They'd gone down there for a cosmetic medical procedure. Listen, here's what we're learning, right? Here's what we do know. As Mexican police were looking for the victims, going into hospitals, trying to find them, the gunmen were moving the Americans around to try to create a more confusing situation, according to officials there. New surveillance video shows the four Americans trying to get away, but their kidnappers shot at them and dragged them back into the car, according to the Mexican Attorney General. And take a look. This is the wooden shack where Mexican authorities rescued the victims a little over 24 hours ago, discovering two of them alive, two dead. This is the man they arrested who was found guarding the victims. You see him there. And that's the timeline of this, right? With one more ad, two survivors, as we speak, are recovering in a hospital in South Texas, just across the border from Mexico. That's what we know, right? There's a lot we don't know. Gabe Gutierrez is in Lake City, South Carolina, where the victims are from. As we laid out, a lot of pieces here. One thing we don't know, more about this fifth person who was on the trip, at least up until the border, although it sounds like this person didn't cross the border.
Yeah, that's right, Hallie. We actually just moved to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, where other family members are from, and we've been trying to speak with as many relatives of the victims as we can find, because we are hearing about these new questions and trying to figure out exactly what led up to their trip as they tried to head across the border. Now, you mentioned that according to a law enforcement official familiar with the matter, that official is confirming to NBC News that a fifth person was indeed on this road trip, but got out of the vehicle before the rest of the group crossed the border into Mexico, because that person didn't have the proper documentation, according to the official. Now, we're also seeing this video that was posted on Facebook Live. This was apparently shot by one of the victims, who was shot eventually in the leg and is now recovering, Eric Williams. But in that video, you can see inside that minivan as they were as in the days leading up to them crossing the border. We hear from relatives that these were four childhood friends, but also we're now hearing of a fifth person, and we're blurring that person's face because that person has not been publicly identified. But it raises new questions, exactly why they were heading down there. Law enforcement officials have said so far that the group was heading down there for a medical procedure. But at this point, we don't know what happened to that fifth person. We don't know if that person if investigators are speaking with that person to find out more information. So still a lot of unanswered questions at this point, Hallie, but I have spoken with the brother of Eric Williams, one of the survivors, and he said he was just amazed and shocked and really taken aback watching that procession, that security convoy bringing those survivors over the border yesterday. And he is relieved that his loved one is back in the U.S., but he is mourning the loss of those other Americans, sadly, that passed away, Hallie. So again, we're learning more information about how this all went down, that this guardsman, apparently, according to Mexican officials, is now under arrest, but they are continuing to look for other gunmen that may have been responsible, Hallie.
You know, we are piecing together more of the timeline as we've laid out, Gabe, but you're right. There's still these questions. There's also this question of accountability, because we know that the White House says that it is a top priority with officials in Mexico hunting for these suspected cartel gunmen. The FBI, the DEA, the DOJ has said they're coming for these cartels. It is just a very sweepy thing to say, you know, hey, cartels, we're coming for you, given how much of a problem these cartels are in Mexico right now.
Of course, and they have been a problem, right, Hallie, for decades. But there has been this escalating violence at the border over the last few years, and there has been some friction between the U.S. and Mexican governments over this issue. But I can tell you, Hallie, just today, there were hundreds of members of the Mexican Army and National Guard that have been deployed to Matamoros to step up security. Hallie?
Gabe Gutierrez live for us in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Gabe Gutierrez, thank you very much. Appreciate it, friend. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, tens of thousands of workers protesting in Greece today over that train crash that killed 57 people last week, the deadliest crash in that country so far. The strikes are affecting a lot of the country's travel. Ferries are stopped. Public transportation has stopped in some places. Workers want better safety protocols, saying that's an issue that hasn't gone addressed for a long time. Number 2, some Democrats are expected to join Republicans in the Senate to roll back a set of criminal law reforms passed by the D.C. Council. It's a move that critics say could potentially undermine the push for D.C. statehood by having the federal government now step in to say, hey, yes or no on the city's laws. Initially, it would have overhauled criminal penalties and required more training for D.C. police. Number 3, the Michigan Senate has just passed a law that'll add some legal protection for LGBTQ+ people in the state's civil rights law. This passed with bipartisan support. Governor Gretchen Whitmer is expected to sign it. Number 4, TikTok today rolling out a new feature for content creators to get their money, to get paid. It's called Series, and it means that some of these creators can post videos up to 20 minutes. Here's the catch. If you're not the creator, if you're just somebody who wants to watch it or use it, you have to pay to actually look at this stuff. TikTok says creators can pick their own price. It has to be less than $189. That is a big range. Number 5, the daughter of legendary crocodile hunter Steve Irwin, Bindi, is opening up about her years-long struggle with endometriosis. She posted on Instagram she had surgery to treat dozens of lesions and encouraged women not to give up when getting treatment for pain. Something like 11% of women between the ages of 11 and 44 have endometriosis. It can be really painful. It can cause other issues like infertility. Advocates of talking about it say it's just not talked about enough, and that's why Bindi Irwin is making that news. Coming up, we're talking about a special NBA game tonight. Special not because of the players or the team, but the crew off the court getting so much attention. That's coming up. ESPN celebrating International Women's Day today with only women leading NBA coverage tonight of the 2 teams battling out for a position in a playoff game. You got the Dallas Mavericks on the road against the New Orleans Pelicans. But here's the cool thing. We're not talking about just the broadcasters. We're talking about everybody behind the scenes, too. About 70 women doing the whole production, the video, the graphics, the replays, everything you need to get a big-time network broadcast on the air. This is the 2nd year in a row that ESPN is putting this sort of thing together to recognize all of these women for the work they do. Because after all, opportunities for women in sports media, let's just say that still might need some work. According to one report, only 14% of sports reporters at big papers and websites are women. Out of editors, it's only about 16% who are women. Malika Andrews is part of the lineup tonight. She's a host and reporter for NBA Today on ESPN. We are so excited to see you, and we're especially excited to watch tonight. What's it like? I mean, I know you see these women every day at work. What's it like getting everybody together? How are you feeling about it?
Well, thank you for having me, Hallie. I mean, it feels like a party, right? I think, awesome. You know, it's what you mentioned, right? These are the women that I get to work around every single day. So the thing that's special about today is that you get to see them, that everyone at home gets to see them. And so these are the women that work, the woman who's literally operating the camera that I am talking to right now. I see Gabby and I see Becca and I see all of these folks every single day. But the thing about it is today we are highlighting all of them in the highest profile broadcasts that we have on this network, games. And so that's what makes today special, is that really it's just women who are already putting in this work are getting their flowers.
What is also interesting here is like a layer to this is that even though, and I love seeing some of these images, some of these pictures that we have up from your Instagram, Malika, but there's just, it feels like there's not enough women in sports, right? And it's not that it's a gender thing. It's just like the facts on the ground as we laid out with some of those stats. It feels like from where I sit, there's still a long way to go, but you're the one sitting in the seat. You tell me.
No, I think that it's one of those things where we've made a lot of progress and there's still a long way to go. I think that the issues surrounding women in sports, they mirror the issues of women in society. What we are looking for, what women are striving for at the end of the day is simply equality. And that shows up in a myriad of different ways. That shows up in pay discrepancies. That shows up in the number of women who have been head coaches in the NBA. That number is still zero. The number of women who are referees in the NBA, the number of women who are getting those opportunities. And while we've seen that progress, what we can't be is satisfied with it because there's still so far to go in terms of many of those categories, in terms of healthcare, in terms of all of these other things. And so I was listening to the statistics that you laid out, particularly in print reporting, because I think sometimes when you look at television and you see, oh, we have one woman on this desk and one woman on that desk, we take that to mean that this problem is fixed, and it simply isn't. So we are making strides, but I think we still have a ways to go. What gives me a little bit of hope, what gives me some encouragement is the fact that there are days like today where we're talking about it, where folks are listening. And so I think that those conversations are being had. It's about how we can push them forward.
So not to get like super philosophical with you, but as we were putting this discussion with you together, no, I was sitting here thinking, because we do this sometimes, right? Like where we say, hey, we're going to shout out all these rock star women who are doing this like badass thing. Yes, love it. But like, I wonder sometimes if a sign of progress is going to be like that we don't have to call out all women coverage because it's just so normal, because it's happening so often. Like, isn't that kind of where we want to get?
I think that's where it's special but not uncommon. I think that's sort of the line that we're trying to toe and that we should work toward towing. When I speak at schools or maybe at different panels, one of the questions I sometimes ask is just raise your hand, particularly in a group of women, if you have been the first, or if you have been the only in any role. And most of the room's hands go up. And while, as you're cycling through these images, there's so many things that I'm proud of in my career. The fact that I'm 28 years old, and last year at 27, I was the first woman ever to host the NBA draft is something that I'm immensely proud of. But I'm also hopeful that we can push towards a day where there's a couple less people who raise their hand on that first and only. While I'm proud of those women, and I'm proud to be one of those women, it can also be an incredibly isolating feeling. I think today is the day that you celebrate all of the maybe sugary moments around all of it, but then there's also those really hard moments when you feel alone. And so hopefully we're pushing towards a place where we feel a little bit less alone.
Oof, do I have chills from that story? I love that, and I think that's really powerful. Malika, thank you so much. Have fun tonight. Good luck.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate you.
To tonight's original now with in-depth reporting on a topic we've been watching. And while new data out today shows, there are less jobs, fewer jobs available, there's still big demand for workers. That could be another thing that makes interest rates go up. Job openings dropped by about 400,000 in January compared to December. And economists say that's not enough to help cool off inflation. And since today, as you heard in our conversation with Malika, is about women, it is important to note inflation matters even more for women. Why? Women still don't get paid as much as men. Experts say there's not any sign that's going to get better anytime soon. The gender pay gap is real. It is still here. Vaughn Hilliard has the story.
The gender wage gap in America persisting into 2023. The efforts to close it ongoing, but the reality starkly unchanged. Data from the Pew Research Center details how women in the American workforce are making 82 cents for every dollar that men make. The rate narrowing by just 2 cents since 2002. 28-year-old Cindy Sue works in costuming at Disney World in Florida.
Typically, the female roles are seen as less, and so it doesn't deserve to be compensated for the same amount as a man's job should be.
She's one of nearly 1,000 union costuming workers at Disney World fighting for a new contract and against what she says are ingrained differences in the way women's work is viewed when compared to the roles traditionally dominated by men.
I feel like when people think of what a seamstress is, they probably are like reminded of their grandma who fixed a button on their pants. And it's like, at Disney, this job is not like that at all. All the machines we use are industrial machines.
Sue points to the limited pay increase opportunities compared to those working in more male-dominated positions, like rigging, tech, and lighting. Disney did not return NBC's request for comment, but has said in a 2021 report that a gender pay gap does not mean that women make less than their male counterparts doing the same job. The president of the local union telling NBC News this issue goes beyond Disney World.
Why has the narrowing of the wage gap stalled here in the 21st century?
Around the time parenthood approaches, ages 35 to 44, when you are most likely to have young children at home, we see a wage gap widen.
Is that because of the traditional views of who bears responsibility for childcare?
Yes, that has something to do with it. There are social and cultural norms at work. And in an accompanying survey we did, in fact, women are much more likely to say that they feel greater responsibility to take care of family needs by a much greater margin than men.
In the study, 50% said another major factor is the treatment of women in the workforce compared to men.
When it comes to policies that make it easy for women to access affordable childcare, maternity leave benefits, we have found that the US does kind of lag behind, unfortunately, in those areas.
The World Economic Forum estimates that at this rate, it would take 132 years to close the wage gap.
What keeps you fighting for the cause?
They're going to be forced to come to the fact that the people who are really good at doing this don't want to work for you. The day will come. The day will come.
Well, let's hope, man. Like, let's hope. You know what I mean? We'll see. Vaughn is with us now, obviously. And Vaughn, we're talking about the gender gap. What about when you factor in race or age?
Right. There's absolute disparity based off of one's race or ethnicity that this research shows, but also age. As a woman gets older, that disparity only increases. And the number of variables at play are so extensive. Of course, what you heard there was the childcare and the traditional concept, largely here in this country, that usually falls on the part of a woman. And you even see that play out in the types of maternal care or maternal leave offered compared to paternal leave in so many workplaces. But also as individuals, as women in the workplace seek promotions and seek new job opportunities. A past Pew report also found that 40% of women said that they felt like their job opportunities were not presented to them for promotions in the same way that men were presented those opportunities. And so that is where, over the course of time, you see that disparity only grow from the data. Hallie?
Vaughn Hilliard, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Coming up, we've got some developing news here on the show, including what the Norfolk Southern CEO will tell members of Congress tomorrow about the derailment of a train in East Palestine. Plus, there's this. Imagine your steering wheel falling off while you're driving. That was the case for 2 Tesla drivers. More on that federal investigation when we come back. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our West Coast Bureau, police rescued a man in Oregon who was stuck in the snow. And they got to him because he used his drone to help out. That's right. So the deal is this guy's car got stuck. He didn't have any cell service. So he wrote out a text describing where he was. He attached his cell phone to a drone and then sent it up. When it got higher and higher, the phone connected to a cell tower, and then the text went through. A rescue team went out and found him. They actually ended up finding another stranded person, too. That's like pretty incredible, pretty ingenious to do that. From our Southern Bureau, dispatchers in West Virginia say a rock slide caused a CSX coal train to derail this morning. The train apparently was hit by a boulder. Some of the cars caught fire, slid into a river. 3 crew members were hurt and taken to a local hospital. CSX says the train cars were empty at the time, but there's reports that diesel fuel got into the water there. And from our Northeast Bureau, just in the last hour, Syracuse men's basketball legendary head coach Jim Boeheim announced he's retiring after 47 years leading the team. He won more than 1,000 games for Syracuse, retiring with the 2nd most wins in Division I history. 5 Big East tournament titles, 5 Final Fours, and a national championship back in 2003. The announcement about Boeheim coming moments after Syracuse got knocked out of the ACC tournament in the first round by Wake Forest. So the feds are investigating Tesla, this time because of at least 2 complaints of steering wheels just straight up popping off while people are driving. Look at this. The steering wheel fell off while somebody was on a highway. Okay, there it is. Then now it's not attached to the car. Like, not amazing, not ideal. The regulators don't think so either. They're looking to now 120,000 Model Y Teslas. That's Tesla's top seller. Not a great thing, not a great look. Generally, for the car company, especially right now, safety-wise, regulators are also looking into the autopilot system of Tesla, opening up a special crash investigation into an accident in California last month because it thinks a Tesla that crashed into a fire truck was in auto mode. That driver died. 5 others got hurt. There are also new recalls of one of its models because of a loose bolt. NBC News has reached out for comment from Tesla, which, remember, broke up its media relations department. We have not heard back yet. Laura Kolodny is here to break it down. She covers Tesla for CNBC. That sounds stressful. I think that is like a fairly journalistically objective way to put it, right? You're driving, your steering wheel pops off. One owner said the whole ordeal was horrible, and you're seeing the impact on Tesla stock today.
That's right. It's actually the kind of thing that usually precedes a voluntary recall. NHTSA, the Federal Vehicle Safety Regulators want Tesla to determine, hey, how many of these cars got out like this? This is the kind of quality issue that should have been caught at the factory or at the service or delivery center before it ever reached the customer's hands. So sometimes you'll see a reaction in the stock price. The autopilot issue is a separate matter. So for years now, actually, Tesla has been investigated by the Federal Vehicle Safety Regulators over a string of crashes that involved their cars hitting stationary first responder vehicles, police vehicles, fire trucks, et cetera. This crash last month that happened here in Contra Costa County in California, the Tesla driver died. 4 firefighters were in the fire truck when it collided with that truck, and the passenger in the vehicle sustained serious injuries. Now NHTSA wants to know, hey, were your driver assistance systems, autopilot, and FSD engaged? And did they contribute to the crash, or was this some other driver fault? What happened here exactly? So they're taking a deep dive.
Big picture, sort of goes to the 30,000-foot view here, because we ticked through some of the safety concerns that have come up related to Tesla, right? Is that because there's so much attention on Tesla? Like, in other words, is that out of the norm as compared to other automakers and other car companies? Because there is such a spotlight on everything that Elon Musk and Tesla does? Or could this have, I mean, you're talking about the broader business implications, but give us that, like, view from above, basically. Put it into perspective for us.
This is a fair question, and lots of Tesla fans assume that the only reason these things get media coverage is because it's Tesla and there's so much hype, Elon Musk, electric vehicles, and all of this. But the truth is that Tesla is the only automaker that has taken this approach with the driver assistance systems. The names are autopilot and full self-driving of their brands. And so there's a question about how much can people rely on these and what's happening? In addition to that, they also released this beta version of FSD, their premium option. And so there is a lot of, investigative work around this by the regulators to get to the bottom of it. It's new tech. You're going to get investigated. As far as the other recalls, this is pretty standard stuff in automotive. Things happen, right? The mature automaker, and Tesla is getting beyond its startup days here, will simply work with regulators to figure out what happened. Nobody wants unsafe cars with a defect on the road, whatever the cause may be.
That's a great point, Laura Kolodny. Thank you very much. It's great to see you, as always. Appreciate it. There's some more news just breaking into us in the last couple of minutes here. The head of Norfolk Southern, the company that operated the train that crashed with all those toxic chemicals on it in East Palestine in Ohio, we are getting a look at the testimony that he will deliver tomorrow on Capitol Hill. He is expected to say, I'm quoting here from this testimony, that he is deeply sorry for the impact of that derailment. He'll also emphasize the $20 million in financial help that the company is offering. But he'll say that the company will, in his words, continue to invest in East Palestine for as long as it takes to help the community recover and thrive. We're going to have much more coverage, of course, of that hearing and that testimony tomorrow right here on NBC News Now. Also right here on NBC News Now, ordinary workout. No, thank you. How about a hot girl walk workout? We'll talk about why it matters to so many people, specifically on this International Women's Day. Don't miss it. That's next. It's chilly today in New York, but not too chilly for the hot girls to hot girl walk, right? We talked about how it is International Women's Day, and so today you had a big group of folks meeting up for a 4-mile hot girl walk in Central Park, raising money to give girls greater access to sports. Watch. Today, about 100 people are meeting up in Central Park, lacing up their sneakers and queuing up their playlists, not just for any workout, but for something called a hot girl walk.
When I think about hot girl walk, I think it's sexy, I think it's powerful, and I think it's full of life, and it's a celebration of you.
It's just a really fun way to celebrate women and to just like get our strut on.
It just like reminds me to be like thankful for the body that I have and that can take me from point A to point B.
Okay, so what exactly is a hot girl walk?
Peace up, A-Town.
In November 2020, the pandemic left Mia Lind feeling isolated and out of control until
I started going on really long walks to kind of confront those really negative feelings that I was having.
That energy started a movement.
You're only allowed to think about 3 things on the hot girl walk. 1, things you're grateful for. 2, your goals and how you're going to achieve them. And 3, how hot you are.
That TikTok video has more than 3 million views. And the hashtag #HotGirlWalk, more than 500 million.
Everybody is obsessed, and I mean everyone.
Now, for Women's History Month, Strava, an app that tracks physical activity, has a challenge.
Go on a hot girl walk. Take a 4-mile walk. Think about your goals. Give gratitude for who you are. And really just reflect on like how hot you are, because hot is a state of mind after all.
The challenge doesn't just benefit the person walking, but a bigger cause too.
Whenever anybody completes the challenge, Strava's going to donate $4 to girls. It's an international organization that impacts adolescent girls all over the world and gives them access to sport and activity in over 100 countries.
Of course, even after this month, you can hot girl walk to get a little pep in your step.
I created the hot girl walk to help destigmatize walking as a valid form of exercise because it is something that is accessible. Most people are able to get out there and do it, and it really is so beneficial for your body and your mind to go on walks.
And science shows any kind of movement can help. Maybe even boost your mental health with only about 150 minutes of physical activity each week, which works out to less than 22 minutes a day.
A lot of people look at fitness as something that's super intimidating. And for me, I look at it as something that is therapeutic, it's cleansing, and I get to soak in the sun.
And it's nice to not really put any pressure on yourself. You're not thinking about speed, you're not thinking about strength necessarily, and you feel really good after it.
And on this International Women's Day, there's extra upside.
I hope people take away that as women, we always need to stick together and support one another and lift each other up no matter what.
If you can talk the talk, you can walk the hot girl walk. As a 4-day-a-week hot girl walker myself, endorse. That's it for this hour. We'll see you tomorrow. I will not see you. I'll be celebrating a very special 3-year-old's birthday, but you will be in good hands, and I'll be back on Friday. Same time, same place tomorrow, folks. Coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.